Guys, welcome back. It is Racer X, and today, actually, the snow is just about gone here in North Texas. It's a super windy day, but at least it is sunny, which means the cars can come back out, and I'm super excited about that. And today I wanted to put a little video together for you, really kind of comparing, once again, the Scat Pack to the Mustang and kind of the Camaro as well, to a degree. And I want to talk about the difference in weight. I've talked about this many times, but it is a subject that really bears a lot more discussion. So how would the Scat Pack actually fare against the Mustang if they actually weighed the same amount? Well, guess what? Today I'm going to tell you. Also, guys, if you are new to my channel, do me a huge favor. Slap subscribe for me. I have a lot of really great content coming up here in 2021. Lots of fun stuff. Also, subscribe to me on Instagram, and we are off. We got the 1,000 horsepower HELLCAT. God. Now, guys, I do realize that these two cars are inherently different. I want to talk about some of the differences of the specs of these two cars, because I feel like it does make for a pretty interesting comparison, but it's so windy out here, my beard is about to blow directly off my face. So I'm going to go inside my office here, and I want to give you some of the stats. So now, out of the wind, I can actually give you some of these specs on these cars. I really want to kind of start out with the Challenger Scat Pack, and it does have the largest displacement engine of obviously both the Camaro and the Mustang GT. But when you talk about the weight of this, which is really kind of the crux of the conversation here, this car comes in at 4,233 pounds, which is obviously this is a naturally aspirated vehicle. When you look at the Mustang GT Premium, it comes in at 3,752. The Camaro SS actually comes in at 3,788. So those two are actually really close. But when compared to the Mustang, 481 pounds is the difference, and that is pretty significant. It would be like having two of your really good linebacker friends sitting in the car with you at all times if you were in the Mustang. So also, when you talk about the length of the cars, the Challenger is just overall, it's just a bigger car. 197.9 inches versus both the Mustang and Camaro that basically came in at like 188.5. So essentially, the Challenger is about 9.5 inches longer. And yes, it does have a little more headroom. It feels a little bit wider when you're sitting in it. So if you're a bigger person, it actually works out quite well. But when you're talking about speed and weight, it can actually hurt the car a little bit. Next, I want to talk about the engines in these cars. Just give a few more specs on the engine. So obviously, I've done my research on this. So the 6.4 Hemi actually weighs 740 pounds. Significant amount of weight. And of course, this thing has a cast iron block, where when you talk about the Mustang and the Camaro, you're talking about an all aluminum block. So, you know, the Hemi does have aluminum heads, but the cast iron block does weigh quite a bit. The Mustang GT engine, actually, the Coyote comes in at 445 pounds, and the LT1 in the Camaro comes in at 465. So when you really compare it to the Mustang, you're talking basically 300-pound difference just in the engine block alone, and that is pretty significant. So if the difference in weight between the blocks of these things is 300 pounds, where does that additional, say, 181 pounds really come from? Well, the best analogy I can think of is kind of like when you have a person. You've got a basketball player that's 7 feet tall. They tend to just weigh more than somebody who's 6 foot tall or even 6'4", right? You get that weight spread out over the course of a longer frame. And as I did mention, 9.5 inches longer on the Challenger. And so, you know, the chassis is probably a little bit heavier in places on that car too. So as I mentioned, total weight difference, 481 pounds when comparing the Mustang GT Premium to the Challenger Scat Pack. And of course, the Charger, as we know, is about 150 pounds more than the Challenger even. So the weight difference is even greater there. So what does that mean when we talk about how much faster the Scat Pack would be if it really did weigh the exact same as the Mustang? So now, to the important part of this conversation, right? If the Scat Pack did, in fact, weigh the same as the Mustang, Dodge was able to strip out that 481 pounds, and then you have this perfect apples-to-apples weight comparison, knowing that the two power plants are very different, what would the result be? Well, Wallace Racing, which is one of my favorite little sites to go to just to kind of figure out what might be the difference if you were to add power, subtract weight. They have so many really neat calculators. I'll go ahead and put the link to that down below so you guys can go try it out for yourselves. There's so many different ways to calculate things. It's actually pretty neat. But they have a calculator on there that is all you do is put in the weight and the horsepower, and it essentially gives you the ET. And believe it or not, it is pretty darn accurate. So very cool. So if you put in the statistics for the Scat Pack, just normal stats, it makes 485 horse. And also it weighs, like I said, it weighs 4,233 pounds. Put that in there. It tells you that the car should run an 1199 at a 1269. That's based on sea-level stats, with just kind of average DA. Now, when you put in the Mustang stats, basically you're going to get an 1172 at 115.26, right? So that's 460 horsepower. And then, of course, the car weighs significantly less at 3752, right? So you're talking about, about 2.5 tenths difference in favor of the Mustang in the quarter mile, and more than about 2.5 miles an hour in favor of the Mustang. Now, here is where things change. So when we plug in the Mustang's weight with the Scat Pack's power, now all of a sudden the Scat Pack is running an 1152 at 117.31. So the difference has now swung in favor of the Scat Pack by quite a bit, by about 2 tenths and about 2 miles an hour. Interesting how weight changes. Now, I do realize there are some other things at play here, right? The Mustang and the Camaro both have fantastic 10-speed transmissions. Let's really help them out on the top end, whereas, you've got an 8-speed transmission in the Scat Pack, but it is still really, really good. Now, also, the Mustang and the Scat Pack, this is just another little interesting thing to put out there. If you were to, say, put the Mustang Coyote engine into the Scat Pack, what would it run? Well, then all of a sudden that car is running a 1221 at 110, which is obviously significantly slower than what the Scat Pack runs it in. So it just makes for a very interesting comparison. It tells you just how powerful that Hemi engine really is if Dodge could figure out a way to get some weight out of the thing. Now, there's also another little rule of thumb that us racers like to use from time to time, and that is essentially you're going to pick up about a tenth for every 100 pounds saved. Now, while that's not super accurate, it is pretty close. And when you plug it into the calculator, it's really not that far off. So that gives you a pretty good indication. So when you're out there and somebody is, say, 300 or 400 pounds lighter than you can automatically expect that they're going to have a probably 3 to 4 tenth difference on you, even, if you have a power difference. So you just have to kind of think about that going into it. Another little key distinction, I also checked the HELLCAT stats versus the Shelby GT500 and Camaro ZL1. And believe it or not, the HELLCAT is still 257 pounds heavier than the Shelby GT500, which when that came out, a lot of people said, man, that car's heavier than I thought. And the really staggering thing is it's 542 pounds heavier than the Camaro ZL1. The Camaro ZL1 actually came in a lot lighter than I thought at 3886. So you're talking about almost a 550 pound difference between a HELLCAT running around on the street and a ZL1 Camaro. So despite the fact that ZL1 is not as powerful, it has a big weight advantage over the HELLCAT. So something to think about there as well. There's one other key distinction I want to bring up, and despite the difference in weight, the Scat Pack still does fantastic against both the Camaro and the Mustang in the 8th mile, which, that's where the Scat Pack really shines. So, despite lugging around all that weight, it just shows you that torque difference on that big Hemi. It's fantastic. So imagine if Dodge could pull the weight out, just how dominant it would be. Most races I have seen in the 8th mile, the Scat Pack still wins out, all things being equal in terms of, when people actually launch on the tree and all that kind of stuff, by about a car to a car and a half in the 8th in favor of the Scat Pack. You take that weight out, I'm thinking it's more like 3.5 cars in the 8th mile.
Good God, man.
So, what it boils down to is the fact that these Hemi engines are so punchy and they are phenomenal. It's just they're lugging around all that extra weight. So I'm calling on Dodge to figure out a way to strip some weight out of these cars. And I still feel like the Mopars will be dominant out there if they can figure out a way to do that. Well, and that about does it for this one, guys. It does make for a very interesting conversation when you talk about how dominant these Mopars would be if Dodge could somehow take some weight out of these things. So something interesting to ponder. Let me know what you think about this in the comments down below, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one. So until then, Racer X.